What is next for Panthers quarterback Bryce Young? That is the topic I'm going to dive into on today's episode of Verts. My name is Harrison Graham. I want you guys to comment down below. In 2025, Bryce Young will be on what team? Fill in the blank, if you will. Will it still be the Panthers? Will it be a different team? Let us know what you guys think in the comments. Bryce Young's 2025 team will be, fill in that blank, and let us know who you think he'll be playing for. All right, let's get to the latest reporting on how this benching came to be, and then we'll kind of explore what next steps could look like for Bryce Young as he moves forward in his NFL career. Obviously, David Tepper, according to multiple reports, and he's done it before, had influence in this decision. And if you don't know who David Tepper is, I know you Panthers fans are familiar with him. He's their owner, and he kind of feels like the new Dan Snyder, where no one really likes him. If something popped up that people didn't like that's going on in the building, I don't think anyone would be surprised. He's just a little too involved and kind of a hothead. And apparently Bryce Young was blindsided by this decision and is pissed by this decision to be benched in favor of Andy Dalton, which I don't blame him. Now, on the flip side, Bryce Young's been bad. Let's just be honest. He hasn't been good. I get the infrastructure is a disaster, and Carolina is a mess. So I do kind of want to mention that, okay, you've been bad, Bryce, but the situation's pretty bad as well. We see this all the time with quarterbacks that you've got to factor in the situation they walk into, but he's been a bad player as well, and it looks like he's regressed. And if that locker room doesn't believe in him, I understand making a switch, but at the same time, the amount of assets Carolina put into getting Bryce Young, the infamous trade with the Bears, you're going to punt on that two games into year two. That feels early, and it almost feels like it's irreversible, which makes me wonder, is a trade coming? Is Bryce Young going to be on the move? And I wonder if the Miami Dolphins could be a team that makes sense. Could the Dolphins trade for Bryce Young with Tua's uncertain future? Now, apparently he's not going to retire. They placed him on IR yesterday, so he's going to miss at least 4 games, spend some time with neurologists, and I guess try to figure out how he can avoid these situations in the future. I don't know how you do that. It's a contact sport. Obviously, last year, Tua put on some weight and played all 17 games, but this year lost some of that weight, wanted to be more mobile, and the first somewhat decently hard hit he takes, he gets concussed again. I think that situation is very fluid in Miami, even if he's decided to not retire. Do you take a swing at Bryce Young? I think that offense with Mike McDaniel, while a little complex, can be pretty QB-friendly, and Bryce Young has some similarities to Tua. Undersized, not the best athlete, but in theory, his game should be as an accurate and anticipation thrower. Now, he hasn't proven that at this point in the NFL, but obviously was the guy behind Tua at Alabama before he took over. Maybe that could be a good fit. Mike McDaniel has done a good job of maximizing Tua. If Tua was out for the season, this would feel like a no-brainer. It doesn't feel like that's the situation at this point, but I do wonder if Miami could make sense if, say, they don't like where Tua's progress is or he does miss an extended period of time. How about the New York Giants? The New York Giants stink. Their GM and head coach appear to be on the hot seat in Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen. Do you take a swing here? If Daniel Jones struggles for a couple more weeks, say they're 0-3, 0-4, do you just kind of throw a dart at a dartboard and say, hey, we're trying to keep our jobs. We're trying to prove we could be the guy. Brian Daboll's supposed to be this kind of QB whisperer. Maybe he can get it done with the guy who was the #1 overall pick less than 18 months ago. Obviously, once you start playing in the NFL, that equity doesn't matter nearly as much, but he has some talent. I get it. He's small. He's really small at the NFL level. He's not a great athlete. The arm strength isn't apparently that great from what I've seen. I think that's pretty clear. But the guy went #1 for a reason. Can Brian Daboll get something out of him? I'd be pretty interested if I was the Giants, if the price was low, which that part of it, I don't know what Carolina would take for Bryce Young. I mean, would it be like the Trey Lance trade, a 4th-round pick? That probably seems fair. I don't think you're getting a day 2 pick if you're telling the world you're punting on this guy after 18 career starts. But that would be an interesting possibility if the Giants hopped in on the potential trade sweepstakes. How about the Tennessee Titans? Will Levis has been a train wreck. He has single-handedly cost Tennessee their first 2 games. If he just plays turnover-free against the Bears, they win that game pretty easily in week 1. He just kept giving the ball away. Disastrous turnover where he flips the ball out as he's being tackled, turned into a pick 6. Week 2, disastrous turnover where he skips a screen backwards and it's recovered by the Jets. It's like, what are you doing? They would have won both those games if he was just adequate. I'm not saying Bryce Young is adequate, but he obviously had more equity coming into the draft as the number 1 overall pick versus a second-round pick. Is that an option? Does Tennessee view him as someone that they feel like they could plug and play? Their backup's Mason Rudolph. I wonder if we'll see Rudolph at some point this year if Levis keeps playing like this. But Tennessee actually has some players. That's one thing Bryce Young and his agent can sell to other teams. This franchise, talent-wise and organization, is a disaster. I get they paid Robert Hunt $1 million at guard, but that offensive line has been a disaster. Adam Thielen, 34-year-old's their number 1 receiver. The Titans have DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, and yes, a young offensive line, but one that's looked decent so far. I think that could be an interesting landing spot. And then the last one is the Raiders. Now, the Raiders picked up a surprising win at Baltimore this week. Gardner Minshew is a steady veteran. I don't think he's going to lose his starting job this year, but you could sit behind Gardner Minshew, another undersized, not great athlete guy who's found a decent career in the NFL, learn from him, and then compete to be the starter in 2025. I think that could be a possibility for Bryce Young because there's a scenario where the Raiders are too good this year in terms of not being able to draft one of the top quarterbacks early on, or maybe they don't love this QB draft class and they say, you know what, let's bring Bryce Young in here, try to salvage him, and if that doesn't work out, maybe we draft a guy in 2026, a draft class that many think is going to be better than 2025 at quarterback. So I think that's a pretty interesting scenario as well. Those are 4 teams I feel like could make a lot of sense for Bryce Young in his next steps in his career. Now, what about Carolina? Is it over? Is it completely done with? I personally feel like reinserting him into the starting lineup, while it could happen, when you bench a quarterback who you drafted number 1 overall 2 games into his second season, kind of feels tough to come back from that, doesn't it? Especially when the owner gets involved. Like Tepper's basically saying, we don't think he's the guy, we're trying something else. Feels like they're just going to draft another quarterback next year, which if you're one of these top guys, like you don't want to go to Carolina, I don't think. This signals a likely ending. I could obviously see at some point this year he goes back in there. I don't think anybody expects Andy Dalton to lead Carolina to the playoffs or anything, so maybe you sit Bryce for a month or 2 and give him another crack later in the season. But even if he goes back in there, does anyone expect him to just light it up to finish the year? I feel pretty strongly that he'll be elsewhere in 2025, whether it's one of those 4 teams I mentioned or someone else. Let me know in the comments who you think he'll be playing for next season. But, yeah, it feels like it's over for Bryce Young in Carolina at this point in his career. So it's been ugly, it's been fast, but that's the NFL, man. And we'll see what happens next. But, you know, he has to carry some weight too because he just has not played that well. All right, there you have it. Bryce Young's future. We'll see what happens. Wishing the best for him. Seems like a great kid. I understand his frustration of being benched 2 games into year 2. You're like, you're done with me? That's pretty tough. Help us reach 3,000 subscribers. We are publishing daily NFL and college football content. If we get to 3,000 by next Tuesday, the end of week 3, I will personally send $30 to 1 lucky subscriber. So support the show. We'll support you. Appreciate it very much. My name is Harrison Graham. We will see you guys very soon.